August 3rd, 1944, near Avranches, France. Dust hangs in the morning air like smoke from a distant fire. Engines rumble low and constant across the Norman countryside. Captain William H. Thompson, 4th Armored Division, squints through his field glasses as the column ahead of him begins to move. Sherman tanks grind forward, their tracks biting into the narrow French roads. Behind them, endless lines of half-tracks, tank destroyers, fuel trucks, a steel river pouring south and east. You can hear it before you see it. The roar of the U.S. Third Army breaking loose. On August 1st, command of the newly activated U.S. Third Army passed to Lieutenant General George S. Patton Jr., a man whose reputation preceded him. 2 days earlier, on July 25th, Operation Cobra had blasted open the German front west of Saint-Lô. Now the narrow corridor at Avranches had become a gate, and Patton intended to drive through it at full speed. In his forward command vehicle, Patton stood rigid, ivory-handled revolvers at his hips, helmet polished, eyes fixed eastward. "We will keep moving," he had told his corps commanders. "We will keep them running." To the north, German Army Group B reeled. Field Marshal Günther von Kluge struggled to restore order after the collapse triggered by Cobra. Communications were fractured, units were intermingled. Divisions that had fought doggedly in the hedgerows were now disintegrating under relentless air attack. But in early August, Berlin still believed the situation could be stabilized. At OKW headquarters, reports arrived describing an American exploitation. The tone was measured, the language clinical, yet something in the numbers unsettled the staff officers. American armored divisions were not merely advancing, they were accelerating. On August 4th, elements of the U.S. 15th Corps pivoted west toward Brittany, while the main weight of 3rd Army wheeled east. The 4th Armored Division surged toward Le Mans. The 6th Armored followed close behind. Fuel trucks raced forward in risky daylight convoys, vulnerable to Luftwaffe attacks that never came in meaningful strength. The German line had not broken cleanly. It had dissolved. Near Alençon, remnants of the German 7th Army attempted to regroup. Infantry marched without heavy weapons. Panzer crews searched desperately for fuel. Orders conflicted. Some formations were told to hold, others to withdraw. The front was no longer a line. It was a scattering of retreating clusters. On August 8th, American armored columns bypassed resistance, leaving isolated pockets behind for infantry to reduce later. Patton's doctrine was simple. Momentum is survival. If a bridge stood, it was taken. If resistance stiffened, it was flanked. The objective was not territory. It was encirclement. By August 10th, Le Mans was liberated. German forces attempting to retreat eastward found American tanks already cutting across their path. The encirclement forming near Falaise tightened with each passing hour. Inside German command bunkers, the tone of messages changed. Enemy armored spearheads advancing rapidly toward Argentan. Contact lost with forward regiments. Fuel shortages critical. The scale of the penetration became impossible to ignore. What had begun as a controlled withdrawal threatened to become annihilation. On August 12th, Allied forces closed the jaws of what would be known as the Falaise Pocket. Tens of thousands of German troops were trapped, bombed from the air, shelled from the ground, their escape routes narrowing by the hour. At OKW, the maps told a story no one wanted to speak aloud. The American Third Army had crossed hundreds of miles in mere days. Defensive lines prepared for months were bypassed in hours. And still, Patton's columns did not slow. Fuel shortages loomed. Supply lines stretched thin. Yet the order remained. Push east, because now it was no longer about Normandy. It was about France. August 14th, 1944. Argenton, France. The air smells of cordite and burning rubber. Lieutenant Karl-Heinz Bauer of the German 2nd Panzer Division crouches beside a disabled Panther tank, its engine compartment still smoldering. Above him, Allied fighter bombers circle like hawks. Every few minutes, another explosion rips across the valley. The road east is clogged. Trucks without fuel, artillery without tractors, infantry without officers. The trap is closing. Between August 12th and 21st, the Falaise Pocket becomes less a battlefield than a slaughterhouse of machines. Columns attempting to withdraw from Normandy collide headlong with advancing American and Canadian forces. The German 7th Army and elements of 5th Panzer Army struggled to escape encirclement as Allied artillery and air power pulverized the narrowing corridor. From the south, Patton's 3rd Army drives hard toward Argenton. 15th Corps, under Major General Wade Heislip, presses northward with the 5th Armored and 79th Infantry Divisions. Their objective is clear: meet Canadian forces descending from the north and seal the pocket completely. But coordination, terrain, and caution slow the final closure. The corridor remains open, barely. A narrow, shattered gap through which fragments of German formations flee eastward under relentless fire. In Berlin, Adolf Hitler demands counterattacks that exist only on paper. At OB West headquarters, Field Marshal Walter Model replaces von Kluge on August 17th. Model is known as Hitler's fireman, a commander summoned to salvage collapsing fronts. He arrives to find chaos. Rail lines are cut, bridges destroyed, communication sporadic. Entire regiments have ceased to exist. Reports reaching the German High Command grow darker by the hour. Panzer's strength reduced to a handful of operational vehicles. Infantry marching without heavy weapons. Losses catastrophic. By August 18th, Allied artillery pounds the escape corridor around Chambois. Dead horses and overturned vehicles litter the roads. German troops wade through fields at night, abandoning equipment to move faster. Officers tear insignia from uniforms to avoid identification if captured. You can almost feel the desperation. The sense that the war in the West has shifted from maneuver to survival. Meanwhile, Patton watches from his forward command post with growing impatience. He wants to drive farther north, close the gap tighter, finish it completely. But operational boundaries and coordination with 1st Canadian Army limit the thrust. Still, even incomplete, the destruction is staggering. By August 21st, the Falaise Pocket collapses. Tens of thousands of German soldiers are killed, wounded, or captured. Estimates vary, but entire formations have ceased to function as coherent units. Those who escape do so without armor, without artillery, without vehicles. They escape as fragments. For OKW, the implications are immediate and chilling. Normandy was supposed to be a defensive campaign of attrition, a grinding struggle that would bleed the Allies and buy time. Instead, it has become a catastrophic loss of mobile forces in the West. And worse, the Americans are not pausing to consolidate. On August 15th, even as the pocket tightens, Allied forces land in southern France under Operation Dragoon. German forces in the south begin withdrawing northward. The possibility emerges that retreating armies from 2 directions may collide in disarray. Patton senses opportunity. On August 16th, 3rd Army begins pivoting east and northeast in full force. The 4th Armored Division spearheads toward Chartres. The 6th Armored races through Dreux. Engineers throw bridges across rivers under fire. Supply convoys roar forward day and night, headlights blacked out, drivers navigating by instinct and moonlight. The tempo becomes relentless. French civilians line the roads, waving tricolor flags, offering wine and bread. For them, liberation has arrived in a blur of dust and armor. For German commanders attempting to establish new defensive lines along the Seine, the speed is incomprehensible. On August 18th, Chartres falls. On August 19th, American spearheads approach the Seine River. Inside OKW headquarters, staff officers stare at maps that no longer make strategic sense. Defensive positions prepared months earlier are bypassed. Units expected to regroup behind the Seine are shattered before arrival. The withdrawal has turned into pursuit, and Patton's army, fueled by audacity and speed, is now within striking distance of Paris. August 20th, 1944, near Montez-Gassicourt, west of Paris. The Seine glints under a pale summer sun, deceptively calm. Staff Sergeant Raymond Ellis of the U.S. 5th Infantry Division kneels behind a hedgerow, binoculars trained on the far bank. Somewhere beyond that tree line, German engineers are preparing demolitions. A distant boom echoes upstream, another bridge gone. For the men of the U.S. Third Army, the pace has become almost unreal. In less than 3 weeks, they have torn through western France, covering distances that planners once believed would take months. Dust cakes their uniforms, engines overheat, tracks snap, fuel gauges hover near empty, and yet the order remains unchanged. Keep moving. Since the collapse of the Falaise Pocket, what remains of German Army Group B has been in continuous retreat. Field Marshal Walter Model attempts to establish a coherent defensive line along the Seine. It is the last major natural barrier before the German frontier. But the units arriving at the river are shadows of their former strength. Panzer divisions report single-digit numbers of operational tanks. Infantry battalions that once fielded 600 men muster barely 150. Artillery batteries lack horses, tractors, even ammunition. Luftwaffe support is nearly non-existent. Allied air superiority turns daylight movement into a gamble with death. Inside the German High Command, the realization begins to crystallize. The Western Front is no longer a contest of positioning. It is a race against annihilation. On August 21st, American patrols reach the western banks of the Seine at multiple points. The 79th Infantry Division approaches Mantes. The 5th Infantry Division presses toward Fontainebleau. Armored spearheads fan outward, probing for intact crossings before demolition teams can act. German rearguards fight fiercely in pockets. Machine guns chatter from stone farmhouses. Anti-tank guns fire from concealed orchards. But these are delaying actions, not defenses. They buy hours, sometimes minutes, not stability. Patton, operating from forward command posts that shift daily, senses the enemy's fragility. His communications with corps commanders are direct, urgent, almost electric. He demands speed over caution. Bridges are to be seized intact if possible. River crossings forced immediately, if not. On August 22nd, elements of the 5th Infantry Division secure a crossing near Fontainebleau before full demolition can occur. Engineers rush forward under sporadic fire, reinforcing damaged spans. By nightfall, American troops begin crossing the Seine in strength. The river, intended as a shield, has become another obstacle overrun by momentum. In Paris, tension rises. The city stands on the edge of insurrection. German military governor General Dietrich von Koltitz faces conflicting orders. Hold Paris, destroy infrastructure if necessary, delay the Allies. But the reality beyond the city limits undermines such directives. American armored units are approaching from multiple axes. For OKW, the maps are brutal in their simplicity. In 14 days, Patton's army has crossed from the hedgerows of Normandy to the banks of the Seine, a distance of over 400 miles in places of active maneuver. Defensive depth, carefully calculated on pre-invasion charts, has evaporated. What was meant to be a phased withdrawal has become a collapse measured in hours. On August 23rd, Allied forces begin entering the outskirts of Paris. Though the liberation of the capital is primarily executed by other Allied formations, the speed of Third Army's advance has made it inevitable. German forces cannot regroup west of the Seine. They are already pulling back toward the Belgian border. Fuel shortages now threaten the Americans as much as the Germans. Supply columns struggle to keep pace with the spearheads. Patton's staff calculate daily consumption rates that defy logistical norms. Gasoline becomes as decisive as artillery, yet even with constraints tightening, the strategic picture is unmistakable. The Western Front has been ripped open. In Berlin, senior officers studying the reports no longer speak of stabilizing France. They speak instead of holding the Reich's borders. The question is no longer whether the Allies will reach Germany. It is how soon. August 25, 1944. Berlin. Inside the Wolfschanze's concrete corridors, the air is stale and unmoving. An adjutant lays fresh situation maps across a long oak table. Colored pins mark divisions that, on paper, still exist. Red arrows trace Allied advances that seem almost unreal in their length. A staff officer from the operations section clears his throat before speaking. American Third Army elements have crossed the Seine in multiple sectors. Paris is effectively isolated. Retreating formations report severe losses in equipment. The words hang in the room. For weeks, the German High Command had believed that Normandy could be contained, that attrition, terrain, and counterstroke would blunt the invasion. Even after Operation Cobra, there had been talk of restoring coherence along the Orne, then along the Dives, then behind the Seine. But now the illusion is gone. In 14 days, Patton's army has advanced with a speed that unravels doctrine. Blitzkrieg, the method Germany once used to shatter France in 1940, has been turned against its originators. Reports from the field are stark. Army Group B is withdrawing toward Belgium. Rail junctions in northern France are threatened. Surviving panzer units are regrouping without armor. Commanders request fuel, replacements, time, none of which can be supplied in meaningful quantities. Field Marshal Walter Model insists he can establish a defensive line along the Westwall, the Siegfried Line fortifications along Germany's western border. But even he understands the cost. The retreat from France has stripped the Western Front of its mobile reserve. Across France, American armored columns continue east. The U.S. Third Army pushes toward the Meuse. Other Allied armies drive through northern France and into Belgium. The operational map no longer shows a battle for France. It shows a pursuit toward Germany. On August 26th, German forces evacuate positions south of the Somme. Bridges are blown methodically now, not in confidence, but in desperation. Entire depots are abandoned. Fuel is rationed so tightly that some mechanized units must alternate movement by day. At OKW, the numbers are calculated in silence. Divisions reduced below combat effectiveness. Artillery pieces lost, transport destroyed. The material cost of the Normandy campaign has exceeded expectations. But the operational consequence is worse. Strategic depth in the West has vanished. The High Command begins shifting attention to the frontier itself. The Westwall, once considered a secondary defensive belt, now becomes the final shield before the Rhine. Engineers are ordered to accelerate repairs. Volk's grenadier divisions are drafted from reserves and training formations. Yet even as these measures are enacted, another reality intrudes. Allied momentum has not peaked. On the ground, American soldiers sense it too. In villages across eastern France, civilians emerge cautiously from shuttered homes. Church bells ring for the first time in years. Columns of Sherman tanks roll past vineyards and stone farmhouses, heading toward borders that once seemed distant. You can imagine a German staff officer staring at the situation map late at night, tracing with his finger the path from Avranches to the Seine. 14 days, hundreds of miles. No coherent line restored. The war in the West has changed character. What was once defensive maneuver has become retreat toward the homeland. The realization is not dramatic. There is no shouting, no theatrical collapse. It arrives quietly, in the accumulation of facts, in the steady disappearance of units from the order of battle, in the distance between red and blue arrows shrinking toward the Reich itself. By the end of August 1944, France is effectively lost to Germany. And for the German High Command, Patton's 14-day surge is more than an operational setback. It is proof that the initiative in the West has passed permanently, and that the next great battles will not be fought for France, but for Germany.